Not all pain is loud. Some turns into silence, others turn into unexpected strength. Many people have learned to appear fine just to avoid worrying others, but behind the control, the distance, and the extreme independence, there is a deeper story. Carl Jung warned us, when pain isn't understood, it hides and turns into behavior, and what's worse, almost no one notices. They only judge. In this video, you'll learn about the 13 hidden traits of people who've gone through a lot, why they behave so differently, even from themselves, and most importantly, how to turn silent pain into awareness, choice, and healing. So stay with me until the end. This may change how you see yourself and the people you care about. Some scars don't appear on the body, but you can see them in the way someone looks, how long it takes them to trust, or their urge to withdraw, even around others. These wounds don't leave visible signs, but they shape everything inside. Quietly, they affect how someone lives. Old pain doesn't announce itself. It becomes silence where there should be words. It becomes tension where there was once ease. Sometimes the person doesn't even realize they're carrying something. They just feel tired. Everything feels harder than it should. Life always feels heavier for some reason. Carl Jung said trauma is a psychological wound that, when ignored, keeps bleeding inside. But he also said this wound can become a doorway, not to forget the pain, but to transform what still feels threatening. When pain is truly heard, it doesn't become a life sentence, it becomes awareness. The problem is, almost no one teaches us how to listen to pain. Society values performance, not reflection, so people who've suffered a lot learn to manage. They wear masks, take emotional shortcuts and hide. They keep going, sometimes even smiling. But inside, they remain alert, as if any moment could bring back something they barely recovered from. You might see yourself in some of these traits, or you might think of someone close to you who suddenly makes more sense. Either way, the goal isn't to analyze, it's to respond with more empathy, more presence and less guilt. Because every behavior has a backstory. No trait appears out of nowhere. If at any point you feel a lump in your throat or need to take a deeper breath, that's okay. It's just your soul recognizing a part of itself, and that, as small as it sounds, is already a meaningful step. Some people learned early that depending on others can be risky, that asking could lead to rejection or shame. So the mind built a defense, becoming completely self-reliant, strong, decisive, capable, but also exhausted. Carl Jung described the false self as a structure the ego creates when being authentic feels unsafe. It helps us function, but also separates us from others. These individuals grow used to handling everything alone, and the world, without realizing it, starts to believe they truly can, but no one should have to manage everything all the time. That's why the first trait of people who've endured too much is hyper-independence. It may seem like strength, but it's an old wound. From the outside, it looks admirable. On the inside, it feels like a weight. They won't show pain, but they feel it. They won't ask for support, but they need it. They just don't know how anymore, or they feel ashamed, or they've forgotten what it's like to trust without fear. This tension shows up everywhere, in relationships, work, and daily life. Everything becomes performance, everything becomes control, but it comes at a cost. The chest tightens, touch feels unsafe, rest feels like failure. And even with people around, they feel alone, because hyper-independence isn't freedom, it's isolation with an internal lock. People living like this don't want to be a burden, they just want to avoid being left behind again. But in the end, it's just another form of quiet suffering. The second common trait in those who've experienced deep pain is excessive empathy. At first, it seems like a strength, and it often is. But when empathy becomes a survival tool, it turns into a coping mechanism. Some children learn to read a room like they're looking for shelter. They can sense when something's about to go wrong. They notice small shifts in tone, glances, or silence. This heightened sensitivity becomes their way to stay safe. But this deep empathy isn't light or easy. It comes from fear, from trying to avoid becoming the target of a parent's mood swings, or from trying to keep the peace in a tense home. Jung called projection the act of unconsciously placing on others what we haven't faced in ourselves. That's often what happens here. The person feels deeply for others, trying to care for pain they haven't yet addressed in themselves. They become the reliable friend, the helper, the one everyone turns to. But underneath all that support is real exhaustion. People who constantly feel for others usually forget about their own needs. Too much empathy may seem kind, but it can also be a way to avoid facing one's own feelings. A way to live through others, because living for themselves feels too hard. This often leads to uneven relationships, where one gives and the other only receives. Listening to others becomes a way to avoid listening to yourself. Over time, this emotional overload grows. People with this trait may feel invisible when they're not being helpful. That's a clear sign that empathy in this case stopped being care and became a defense. At its core, this sensitivity had a purpose. It helped the person stay safe, but they don't need that defense anymore. Real empathy might now mean turning that same care inward. Some people love with caution, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. They hold back, they observe, they think through every move before letting someone in. And even when they do start to trust, they keep a part of themselves hidden, a part that doubts, a part that no one reaches. It's like a quiet voice always says, "Be careful, this could hurt again." And it could. When someone is hurt in the place they needed safety most, opening up becomes complicated. The memory of abandonment feels louder than the comfort in front of them. Love appears, but fear follows. This is the third trait of people who've been through a lot. Fear of deep connection. Intimacy triggers past pain. It's not about being dramatic. It's about the unconscious responding to old wounds. Even if they don't fully understand their reactions, their body remembers. Jung spoke of complexes, parts of the unconscious that take over our behavior. In relationships, this might look like jealousy, withdrawal, or overreacting, but behind it is usually an inner child who still remembers the hurt of trusting and being left. From the outside, they may seem confident, independent. They might say, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm fine alone." But deep down is a hidden longing, and when someone gets too close, that longing often shows up as fear, control, or silence. Real connection means being present. But for someone with past pain, being fully seen feels too risky. So love becomes a struggle, not a place to rest. If you love someone like this, you'll need patience. And if you recognize yourself, you'll need courage. Not to rush in, but to see that the present doesn't have to repeat the past. Not all love leads to pain. Not every caring gesture is followed by abandonment. Sometimes it's just someone trying to stay. How many times have you heard, "You're so strong," and you smile, say thank you, nod, while no one knows you cried yourself to sleep that night? Some people became symbols of strength because they had no other choice. When everything fell apart early in life, they either held things together or broke down completely, so their body learned to keep moving day after day, even when they wanted to stop. This is the fourth trait. The image of a strong person who breaks down in private. The appearance is composed. The voice is steady. The eyes are calm. But behind it all is a hidden exhaustion. Showing fatigue feels like a weakness. Showing pain doesn't even feel like an option. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask we all wear. But when the pain becomes too much, that mask stops being a choice. It turns into a permanent shield. The person becomes what others need and forgets what they actually feel. The risk is that all this strength becomes a quiet trap. No one offers help because they assume everything is fine, but no one can carry it all forever. No one should. What Looks like stability may actually be containment. What appears as self-control could be fear of breaking down in front of others. Life becomes a constant effort to hold things together on the outside while slowly falling apart on the inside. And when the breakdown happens, it's in private, in the shower, on the pillow, or on the way home. No one sees it. No one guesses, because the performance looks so complete. It doesn't seem possible that something is wrong, but it is. It's been heavy for too long. Real strength isn't about never falling. It's the ability to say, "Today is hard," and trust that someone will hear you without judging, advising, or rushing you. Just hear you. Maybe that's when the armor begins to loosen. The fifth trait of those who've been through too much is sensory sensitivity. Loud sounds overwhelm. Bright lights bother. Crowds drain energy. The mind tries to stay calm, but the body reacts first. The heart races. Breathing shortens. The urge to escape shows up without warning. It's not being overly sensitive or dramatic. It's the nervous system stuck in a state of alert. Behind this sensitivity, there's a story. A childhood marked by sudden danger, a trauma that made the world feel unsafe, a body that hasn't known how to relax in a long time. When pain is deep and ongoing, the body holds onto it. Jung said that what we don't make conscious returns as fate. With old pain, it often returns as physical symptoms. The body speaks when the soul hasn't found words. This sensitivity makes a person notice what others miss, a noise that feels aggressive, a smell others don't detect, a glance that lasts, half a second too long, and feels like judgment. It's like living with the volume turned up all the time. It's exhausting and confusing, especially when others don't understand. They don't see why a room felt uncomfortable, why a party felt overwhelming, or why a simple conversation was so draining. But for someone with this sensitivity, everything feels intense. When understood, this trait can be a gift. Many people with it are intuitive, aware, and observant, but when it's caused by trauma, it becomes hard to manage. The body reacts to threats that the conscious mind has already forgotten, but the soul still remembers. Healing starts when we recognize how pain affects the body. When we see that discomfort isn't weakness, it's memory, and that a strong reaction might be an old part of the body asking to be heard. Not all discomfort is random. Sometimes it's just the body saying, "That was too much for me. I'm trying to keep you safe." The sixth trait of those who've experienced deep pain is the need for control. Not out of being bossy or strict, but because at some point life felt out of control, and they learned that unless they manage everything, things fall apart. Control becomes the way to breathe. They plan every detail, prepare for every scenario, and double-check everything. It's not about power, it's about fear. Fear of being caught off guard again. Fear of facing pain they've already endured. On the outside, it may look like efficiency and responsibility. On the inside, it's constant stress. Even when things are going well, the mind keeps asking, what if something goes wrong? What if I forgot something? What if Carl Jung said the ego tries to control what the unconscious doesn't want to face? Here, control acts as protection from life's unpredictability. It guards against the helplessness that once took over and never fully went away. People stuck in control often struggle to relax. They dislike delegating. They resist surprises, not because they're inconvenient, but because they're emotionally upsetting. They disrupt more than plans. They shake the internal sense of stability. Most don't even notice they're stuck in this pattern. They just feel tired. Always fixing, always doing, even when no one asked, and it has consequences. Relationships feel tense. Simple choices feel overwhelming. The present moment is never enough because the mind is already worried about what comes next. At the root, this isn't about strength. It's about a soul that once felt powerless and is now trying to regain safety. But life can't be fully controlled. It must be lived, and living takes trust. Not blind trust, but a small willingness to try. To believe that not everything needs to be controlled for things to work. Healing doesn't happen by dropping all control. It comes gradually, by realizing you can exist without constant fear of collapse. Letting go of control is like turning off the lights after years of sleeping with them on because you were scared. It feels strange at first. Then it might start to feel like rest, but rest doesn't always come through noise or company. Sometimes it comes through quiet, when the world finally stops pressing in. This leads to the seventh trait of those who've suffered. They seek silence, not because they dislike people, but because they need space, room to breathe without pressure. Silence becomes a place of peace, where the mind and soul can sort through things. That can be hard for more outward social personalities to understand. For them, silence might feel empty. But for someone who has gone through inner storms, silence is healing. Jung saw retreat not as weakness, but as a process of renewal. When things feel overwhelming, the soul withdraws, not to push people away, but to survive. Silence isn't just about the absence of sound, it's the absence of judgment, expectation, and roles. It's a space where pain can exist without needing to be explained, but over time, that silence can become too comfortable. What started as healing can turn into distance. Silence becomes isolation, and isolation turns into being forgotten. That's why this trait needs attention. Not everyone who goes quiet is okay. Sometimes they're just too tired to keep up. What's needed is space, without guilt or explanations, but also the awareness to know when to open the door, to let in someone who listens, who stays. Silence can be a safe place, but it still needs a door. Have you ever noticed how saying "I trust you" can feel simple, yet incredibly difficult? For someone who was hurt while trusting, those words carry weight. The emotion gets stuck, not because they don't feel trust, but because the risk feels too high. The eighth trait of those who've suffered is a guarded heart, not due to pride or distance, but because the last time it was open, it hurt too much. The ego learns to protect itself. It watches, filters, evaluates. It doubts before it believes. It pays attention to every word, every pause, every delay. Love arrives, but it goes through a long checklist before being accepted. And it's tiring for both sides. Affection feels heavy. There's always an inner voice asking, "Is this real?" The heart lives like someone who sleeps with one eye open. Jung spoke of living from fear versus living from trust. Here, fear becomes the main lens. Even when things are good, something inside says, "Be careful." The unconscious doesn't realize time has passed. It still reacts as if the danger is current, even when the other person is kind, even when they're genuine. Doubt stays, just in case, but that wall ends up blocking the very thing they want most: real love. There's no deep connection without opening up, without letting someone in, and the most guarded hearts are often the ones that want love the most. They're just trying not to feel that pain again, but too much protection causes pain too. The key might be in taking small steps, trusting a little, seeing what happens, not giving everything away, but not hiding it all either, because maybe, just maybe, this time, love didn't come to hurt. It came to stay. The ninth trait is a deep sense of justice, not learned from books or speeches, but from lived experience, from being hurt, being betrayed, being ignored, being unprotected. Someone who's felt the weight of injustice learns to notice it early. They won't let it slide. Even small signs of disrespect trigger an old reaction, because the body remembers. The same wound is touched, even if the moment seems small. This sense of justice often shows up young. Children who saw unfairness and couldn't speak up. Teens who rebelled against unfair rules. Adults who fight for fairness as if trying to protect the child they once were. Here, the moral warrior archetype is activated. Someone who fights for dignity, not perfection but fairness. When balanced, this is powerful. But when driven only by pain, it can become harsh or rigid. The challenge is to hold on to that sense of justice without letting it become another kind of armor, to fight when needed, but also know when to pause, to protect without becoming hardened, because people who've been hurt know exactly what injustice feels like, and that gives them a rare chance to protect others the way no one protected them, to speak up without silencing others, to lead with both strength and compassion. Those who carry the sword of justice understand something many others don't. Pain sharpens perception, not just to spot injustice, but to notice what others often miss. People who've suffered deeply develop a kind of radar for the pain of others, even when it hides behind silence. There are looks that cut through, not because of what they say, but because of what they quietly see. They can tell when someone isn't okay, even if they're smiling. They feel what hasn't been said. They understand what was never shared. And they hold space without asking too many questions. That's the 10th trait of those who've suffered too much, the ability to see the invisible in others. It's as if pain tuned their senses. The soul becomes more alert, more empathetic, more sensitive to where sadness hides, even when it's well hidden. And this isn't magic, it's memory. Memory of having lived the same thing, now recognizable in small signs. This kind of perception can't be taught. It's awakened, often after a fall. Those who cried quietly know how to hear silence. Those who felt alone in a crowd learn to sense when someone else feels the same. It becomes almost instinct. Jung once said that as we integrate our own pain, we become more able to recognize collective pain. That's what this trait is, a kind of emotional radar. It doesn't seek attention, but shows up when needed, and often it changes everything. This sensitivity may seem soft, but it carries weight. Because seeing what others don't also brings responsibility. And those who feel deeply for others often forget themselves. They absorb, they care, they get involved, and they vanish. The key is balance. To see others without losing yourself, to be present without disappearing, to feel with someone but not carry everything alone. This ability to perceive the invisible is a gift, but also a reminder. Pain, when processed with awareness, becomes a tool, a presence, a gentle support, not an invasion. And even when the world moves fast, those with this trait know the truth lies in the small things, in how someone sits, in the pause between words, in an "I'm fine" that doesn't quite feel true. Only someone who's felt real pain knows what that means, but seeing others so clearly can come at a cost. While you're reading faces, tones, and gestures, something inside might whisper, "What if you're just a burden?" That's the 11th trait of those who've suffered too much, a deep fear of being a burden. It's a quiet feeling, but always there, a kind of silent guilt for having needs, feelings, or desires. Those who carry this fear rarely speak of it, but it shows in every effort to shrink, to not take up space, in every "I'm okay" said just to avoid worrying someone, in every tear they swallow so no one sees them as weak. This fear usually starts early, when pain was ignored, mocked, or treated as a problem. Kids who were told, "Stop crying, don't be dramatic," or treated like they didn't matter, grow up believing that having emotions is a burden, and that they themselves are too much. The adult they become is kind, helpful, and responsible, but constantly scared of asking for too much. They feel guilty for needing help, bad for showing weakness, always trying to earn the right just to exist. Jung called this unconscious guilt, a wound so deep the ego shapes itself around it, and in this case the wound says, "You only have value if you don't get in the way." So they justify themselves constantly, minimize their needs, even feel uncomfortable receiving love, as if they're taking someone else's place. Living like this is like walking while afraid to leave footprints. existing as if you need permission just to breathe. But the truth is, needing is human, being tired is human, being vulnerable is human, even recognizing that fear is part of the healing, because when you realize taking up space isn't a crime but a right, something shifts. The weight gets lighter. The soul stands taller. You stop feeling like you need to earn love. You stop over-explaining. Just being here is enough. And despite the fear of being a burden, your soul still finds peace in the small things. The warmth of a cup of coffee, a simple good morning, a did you get home safe, the sound of rain while the world keeps moving. That's the 12th trait of those who've suffered too much, the ability to appreciate the little things. It's not romanticizing pain, it's what pain leaves behind. When everything feels like it's falling apart, small moments start to matter more. A quiet day, a deep breath. These no longer feel small, they feel sacred. People who've been shattered notice beauty others overlook. They develop a quiet sense of gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for what followed. The pause, the affection, the stability that once seemed out of reach. Jung spoke of the wise one, someone who returns from their shadow with a new way of seeing the world, more humble, more present. These are the people who smile at sunsets, who thank you for making coffee at the right moment, who tear up at a song that hits a deep place. It's often mistaken for fragility, but it's not. It's depth. It's emotional maturity. It's having survived chaos and still choosing tenderness. This trait is common in those who've lost a lot, because they've learned to treasure what remains. And finally, the 13th trait of those who've suffered. Too much is this, the need for purpose after the pain. Surviving isn't enough. The soul wants meaning. It wants to turn pain into direction. That search is rarely dramatic, but it's honest. It might mean helping others going through similar struggles. It might mean creating, teaching, healing, showing up. It might mean being there for someone, the way no one was for them. But there has to be a reason. Pain wants to become a path. Jung called this the beginning of individuation. When you stop being trapped by your story and begin turning it into awareness, into purpose, into offering, you start showing up differently, less concerned with appearances, more connected to truth. You know life is short, so you make it count. The pain doesn't vanish, but now it points forward, it guides, and one day you look back and see, even broken, you kept going. Even wounded, you still cared. Even without knowing how, you made it through. This isn't about pretending to be strong. It's about no longer just surviving. It's about living on purpose. This kind of growth isn't escape, it's transformation. A quiet truth that says, I went through it, but that's not all I am. You are not your pain, but you don't need to hide it either. There's strength in how you survived, not loud, not always seen, but real. Every trait mentioned here is proof of that, of how you stayed on your feet when it would have been easier to fall. Some traits became shields, some compasses, some burdens, some gifts, but all of them were built to protect something sacred in you. Jung said, the tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what this is. Everything you've grown into has everything to do with what you've survived. You're not broken, you're alive. And that in itself is a strength the world rarely notices. This doesn't mean everything is fixed. It doesn't mean things will suddenly fall into place. But maybe now you can look at those parts of yourself with more compassion. You don't need to hide. You don't have to stay on guard. Your pain can walk beside you now, not lead the way, just walk with you, and that's enough. If this video spoke to you, if you recognized yourself in any of these traits, or thought of someone who carries them, subscribe to the channel. We explore these deep parts of the psyche with respect, simplicity, and truth. And if you made it to the end, leave this phrase in the comments: my pain taught me too. That Way, I'll know you stayed, and someone else might see it and feel a little less alone. See you in the next one. Take care. You deserve it.